Before we begin our long journey into the deep past, take a slow breath, allow your body to sink into rest, and, if you enjoy these calm explorations of history, remember quietly to follow along, so that each new story finds you again when the night calls for it. Now, let us drift backwards, thousands of years, to the place where human civilization itself began. The world more than 5,000 years ago was a place of scattered tribes, shifting landscapes, and small groups of people searching for survival. Across much of the globe, life remained tied to the rhythm of hunting, gathering, or the simplest forms of farming. Yet in one small region, between two mighty rivers, something extraordinary began to unfold. In the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, within the lands watered by the Tigris and Euphrates, a people emerged whose name would echo, fade, and almost be forgotten: the Sumerians. They were not merely another tribe. They were not just farmers or herders. They were builders of the very foundations of organized life, creators of concepts that would ripple across millennia. The Sumerians did not just exist, they invented the patterns by which future societies would live. Writing, laws, schools, epic myths, and the very idea of the city itself, all were born in their land. To speak of the Sumerians is to speak of the first civilization, the prototype of human society. Imagine the landscape as it might have been. The ground, rich with silt after the floods, gave birth to fields of barley and wheat. Canals carved by hand redirected waters into farmland, allowing harvests larger than any one family could ever need. Villages clustered together, then grew, and over time the villages fused into towns, the towns into cities, the cities into a network of cultural brilliance. This was not a sudden change but the steady accumulation of knowledge, of effort, of communal dreams. The Sumerians were among the first to discover that by joining hands and minds, human beings could rise above mere survival. Their cities had names that still seem strange and ancient to us: Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Lagash. Each one a center of life, each one a beacon of human ambition. At night, fires would burn on the altars of their temples, smoke rising into the star-filled sky. Those stars, too, the Sumerians observed, charting their movements, seeking patterns in the heavens to mirror the mysteries of life below. From the observation of stars would one day come calendars, predictions, even the rudiments of astronomy. But for them, it began with awe and reverence. The temple stood at the center of every Sumerian city. It was more than a place of worship, it was the heartbeat of the community. The temple organized the distribution of food, coordinated trade, and managed the labor of farmers and craftsmen. In a sense, the Sumerian temple was the earliest form of government, blending religion with administration. Within its walls, priests held records on clay tablets, pressing symbols into wet clay with sharpened reeds. These marks, at first simple counts of grain or sheep, became over time the first writing system known to humankind: cuneiform. Cuneiform, with its wedge-shaped impressions, is both strange and beautiful. In its earliest days, it was a tool of practicality, numbers, accounts, contracts. Yet soon, it evolved into a medium of literature, of myth, of history. It is through cuneiform tablets that we now glimpse the voices of the Sumerians, preserved in hardened clay across thousands of years. Without their invention, the words of Gilgamesh, the laws of kings, the prayers of priests, and the transactions of merchants would all have vanished into the silence of forgotten time. Picture, if you can, the bustling life of Uruk, one of the world's very first true cities. Streets lined with houses of mud brick. Merchants carrying baskets of dates and grain. Potters shaping clay on wheels, spinners drawing thread, weavers at their looms. Children playing in the dust, chasing each other between doorways. And above it all, the great ziggurat rising like a mountain built by human hands, stairways climbing upward as if inviting mortals to touch the realm of the gods. The Sumerians were deeply spiritual, their lives intertwined with the divine. Every aspect of existence was governed by gods and goddesses: An, the sky god; Enlil, lord of the wind; Inanna, radiant goddess of love and war. To live was to seek favor from these powers, to offer sacrifices, to sing hymns, to pour out prayers in the hope of safety and prosperity. Yet their gods were not always kind. They were unpredictable, sometimes wrathful, sometimes generous. The Sumerians saw life as fragile, subject to forces beyond control, and their religion reflected both reverence and fear. At the same time, their society was astonishingly practical. The canals, the plows, the organized fields, all evidence of engineering and planning. They invented the wheel, transforming transport and trade. They created standardized measurements, weights, and systems of law. In Sumer, we find the birth of bureaucracy, the beginnings of mathematics, the roots of science itself. They built with their hands, but also with their minds, shaping not only bricks but ideas that would never die. And yet, as we look back now, it is striking how much of their story was buried. For centuries, the world forgot the Sumerians. Their cities fell to ruin, swallowed by sand. Their language disappeared, replaced by Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian tongues. Their gods were merged, transformed, or abandoned. Even their very name was lost. By the time of the classical civilizations, by the days of Greece and Rome, almost no one remembered that the Sumerians had ever existed. It was only in the last 200 years, when archaeologists dug into the soil of Iraq and uncovered tablets, that the story of Sumer returned to light. Why, then, were they forgotten? Was it accident, the natural fading of memory with time? Or was it that others, who inherited their knowledge, chose not to preserve their names? Did conquerors erase their identity even as they took their inventions? Perhaps. Or perhaps the Sumerians were simply too ancient, too far removed, for continuity. What is certain is that much of what we call civilization, the idea of city life, of government, of recorded language, was born in their world. As you listen, allow yourself to sink into the rhythm of these words. You are not only hearing of ancient Sumer but also experiencing the slow unfolding of human history itself. The story is vast, and tonight we begin only at the dawn. There will be more, tales of kings and gods, of floods and battles, of inventions and legacies. For now, rest in the knowledge that long before the world we know, there was Sumer, and in Sumer the dream of humanity took its first breath. When we step deeper into the world of the Sumerians, it is not only their monuments and myths that reveal who they were. It is also the rhythm of daily life, the humble, ordinary moments that, taken together, formed the pulse of the first civilization. To imagine their existence is to walk through their dusty streets, to hear the chatter of markets, to see the glow of lamps at dusk, and to smell the bread baking in clay ovens. The foundation of their daily life was agriculture. Fields stretched outward from the cities, organized into plots that were irrigated by canals. Water management was a constant task, opening channels, cleaning silt, reinforcing embankments. Without the flow of the Tigris and Euphrates, their crops could not survive, and without crops, the cities would starve. Barley was the grain of choice, hardy enough to endure the region's climate. It was ground into flour for bread, fermented into beer, and used as a staple in trade. Alongside barley grew wheat, lentils, chickpeas, onions, dates, and cucumbers. Goats, sheep, and cattle provided milk, meat, and wool, while fish were drawn from the rivers. The Sumerian diet was practical but varied, sustaining both laborers and lords. Within the walls of the cities, households buzzed with activity. Houses were built of sun-dried mud brick, their walls thick enough to keep out the heat of summer and the chill of winter nights. A typical dwelling was rectangular, with rooms arranged around a central courtyard. Here, families gathered to cook, weave, and tell stories as the day came to a close. Women played vital roles in maintaining the household, preparing meals, spinning thread, caring for children, while also engaging in trade, especially in the selling of cloth or beer. Men often labored in the fields, worked as craftsmen, or served in the temple's projects. Yet despite these traditional divisions, Sumerian society recognized the importance of women. Some even held positions as priestesses, scribes, or landowners. The streets of a city like Ur or Lagash were narrow and winding. Merchants displayed goods, clay pots, woven baskets, woolen textiles, and jewelry made of lapis lazuli, carnelian, or gold imported from distant lands. The market was a place of voices, bargaining, laughter, and sometimes disputes. Buyers and sellers met not only to trade but also to exchange news, rumors, and ideas. In these encounters, culture itself was shaped and carried forward. The hum of commerce was as essential to the city as the hum of bees to a hive. Children's lives were filled with play and learning. Archaeologists have found toys, small clay animals, rattles, and miniature carts that prove childhood was recognized and valued. Some children, especially those of wealthier families, attended schools run by scribes. These schools were strict, requiring long hours of practice in writing cuneiform. Mistakes could lead to punishments, as some surviving student tablets reveal. Yet through such discipline, the Sumerians ensured that literacy and record-keeping would continue, passing knowledge from one generation to the next. Craftsmen and artisans occupied a special place in society. The potter at his wheel, the metalsmith hammering copper, the carpenter shaping wood, all contributed to the wealth and identity of the city. Tools, weapons, statues, and ornaments bore the marks of their skill. Some craftsmen worked under the patronage of temples, while others sold their wares independently. In their labor, we see not only practical necessity but also the early stirrings of art and beauty. The decorated cylinder seals of the Sumerians, pressed into clay to mark ownership or authenticity, are miniature masterpieces that still captivate modern eyes. Music and song filled their homes and temples. Lyres and harps, flutes and drums accompanied chants and celebrations. In moments of joy or sorrow, music connected the people to their gods and to one another. Hymns inscribed on tablets show that even in those distant days, humans turned to song to express what words alone could not. Justice and order were maintained through systems of law. Though the later Code of Hammurabi is more famous, earlier Sumerian laws set precedents for property rights, contracts, and penalties for crime. Disputes might be settled in the temple courts, where elders or priests would weigh testimony and issue decisions. Justice was not always equal, social rank influenced outcomes, but the very existence of written law marked a profound step in the evolution of society. It meant that rules could be preserved, referred to, and enforced beyond the whim of rulers. Religion permeated daily life. Offerings of food, drink, and incense were given at household altars and temple shrines alike. The Sumerians believed that the gods required constant attention, and neglect could bring misfortune. Farmers prayed for rain, sailors for safe passage, merchants for prosperity, and mothers for the health of their children. Every action, from planting a seed to building a house, was carried out with the gods in mind. This intertwining of the sacred and the mundane gave Sumerian life both meaning and fragility. And somewhere in the midst of these rhythms, let me gently remind you, if these quiet stories of long-forgotten days bring you comfort, consider joining us again by following along, so that the voice of history will always be near when you seek rest. Just as the Sumerians passed on their knowledge through clay tablets, you too can carry forward these stories simply by keeping them close. As day turned to night, lamps of sesame oil were lit in Sumerian homes. Their soft glow cast long shadows on mud brick walls. Families gathered in courtyards, sharing meals of bread, dates, and beer. Conversations wove through tales of work, of hopes for tomorrow, of reverence for the gods. Above them, the same stars we see today spread across the dark sky. To the Sumerians, those stars were divine signs. To us, they are reminders that across millennia, human beings have always looked upward with wonder. The cycle of their life, labor and rest, trade and worship, joy and hardship, was not so different from our own. Though separated by thousands of years, the heartbeat of humanity is recognizable. They too sought security, meaning, and connection. They too dreamed of building something that would last beyond a single lifetime. And in many ways, they succeeded, for the echoes of their daily lives still reach us, carried on fragments of clay, on ruins of walls, and on the enduring idea that civilization is possible. In the heart of every Sumerian city, rising above the homes and streets, stood the ziggurat, a great terrace temple, built in steps as though reaching toward the heavens. To the people of Sumer, this was not only a monument of brick and labor, it was a ladder between earth and sky, a place where mortals and gods could meet. For the Sumerians believed that the world was full of divine powers, and that their gods were the true masters of fate. To understand the Sumerians is to understand their mythology, for it shaped every decision, every festival, every prayer whispered under the stars. The pantheon of Sumer was vast, with gods and goddesses ruling every domain of existence. At the summit stood An, the god of the heavens, the father of the gods, the one whose authority was absolute. He was distant, removed from the affairs of mortals, yet his presence was eternal. Below him, yet perhaps more immediate, was Enlil, the lord of the wind, the breath of storms, and the power that both nurtured and destroyed. Enlil was the god who decreed destinies, whose word was law not only for humans but for the gods themselves. He could grant kingship, but he could also unleash floods and disasters upon those who defied him. Then there was Enki, lord of wisdom, fresh waters, and cunning. Unlike Enlil, Enki was often portrayed as a helper of humankind. In myth, he guided mortals with secret knowledge, teaching them crafts, magic, and survival. His realm was the underground waters, the Abzu, source of life itself. With his cleverness and compassion, Enki was both a trickster and a savior, a figure whose stories reveal the complexity of divine-human relations. Among the most beloved and complex deities was Inanna, goddess of love, fertility, and war. Radiant and fierce, she embodied the contradictions of life itself. Inanna was a goddess of sensual beauty, patroness of desire, but also a warrior queen who led armies into battle. Her myths tell of passion and betrayal, of descent into the underworld, of victories both glorious and tragic. To worship Inanna was to recognize the fire of existence, the pleasures of love and the terrors of conflict intertwined. Other deities filled the Sumerian cosmos: Nanna, god of the moon, who measured the months; Utu, the sun god, who brought justice and light; Ninhursag, the mother goddess, who nurtured life upon the earth. Each had temples, priests, and rituals, each received offerings of food, drink, and song. Together they formed a divine society, a reflection of the human one, full of hierarchies, alliances, and rivalries. The myths of the Sumerians are among humanity's oldest stories. They tell of creation, of the ordering of heaven and earth, of the struggles between gods, and of the fragile place of mortals in the cosmic order. In one tale, the universe began as a mingling of primordial waters, the fresh waters of Apsu and the salt waters of Tiamat. From this union came the first gods, who then shaped the world. Heaven was separated from earth, light from darkness, order from chaos. The gods assigned roles to one another, dividing domains as humans would divide land. In these stories, creation was not a single act but an ongoing process, a negotiation among divine beings. A recurring theme in Sumerian myth is the tension between gods and humans. The gods required sustenance, offerings of bread and beer, sacrifices of animals, and the devotion of prayer. In return, they granted protection, fertility, and the order of the cosmos. But when humans grew too noisy, too numerous, the gods considered destroying them. It was Enki, compassionate and wise, who intervened, warning mortals and teaching them how to survive divine wrath. Thus we see in the myths both the vulnerability of mankind and the possibility of divine mercy. One of the most powerful myths is the tale of the Great Flood. Long before the biblical story of Noah, the Sumerians told of Ziusudra, a righteous man who was warned by a god of an approaching deluge meant to wipe out humanity. Enki whispered the warning, instructing Ziusudra to build a great boat, to seal it with bitumen, and to gather his family and animals. When the waters came, they covered the land, drowning fields and cities alike. But Ziusudra survived, and when the flood subsided, he offered sacrifice to the gods. In return, he was granted eternal life. The echoes of this story traveled across cultures, reshaped in Akkadian, Babylonian, and later Hebrew traditions, but its root lies in Sumer, where floods were both a natural threat and a divine symbol of rebirth. Equally haunting is the myth of Inanna's descent into the underworld. Driven by ambition or curiosity, Inanna resolved to visit the realm of her sister, Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. At each gate of the underworld, she was forced to remove a piece of clothing or jewelry, stripped of her power until she stood naked before Ereshkigal. There, she was judged, struck down, and hung on a hook like a corpse. For 3 days and nights, the world above mourned as life itself seemed to falter. Only through cunning and intervention was Inanna restored, resurrected, and allowed to return to the living. This tale speaks of cycles, of death and rebirth, of vulnerability and resilience, of the hidden forces that shape existence. It is a story both terrifying and hopeful, and in its echoes, one hears the earliest contemplation of mortality and resurrection. Another myth tells of Enki and the creation of humanity. The gods, weary of laboring to maintain the world, decided to fashion beings who would take on the burden of work. From clay and divine essence, humans were formed, molded as servants to the gods. Yet with Enki's wisdom, humanity gained more than mere servitude. They gained intelligence, skill, and the capacity for worship. Thus, in the Sumerian view, mankind was both a helper and a dependent, destined always to serve but also capable of greatness. These myths were not told as idle tales. They were recited in temples, inscribed on tablets, and performed in rituals. They explained the unexplainable, why floods came, why kings ruled, why death was inescapable. They provided comfort in a world of uncertainty, offering patterns where chaos might otherwise reign. Through them, the Sumerians connected their daily lives to the vast cosmos, seeing their struggles mirrored in the dramas of divine beings. And now, as you rest in the gentle flow of these ancient stories, let me quietly remind you, if the calm voices of history bring you peace, you may wish to follow this journey further, to ensure that each new tale finds you when the night is long and rest is needed. Just as the myths were repeated again and again by firelight, so too can these stories return to you, carried softly through time. The Sumerian myths did not vanish. Though centuries of conquest and change erased their temples and scattered their people, their tales endured, passed on by Babylonians, preserved in clay, rediscovered by modern scholars. When we read of Gilgamesh, of Inanna, of the flood, we are hearing voices 5,000 years old, voices that refuse to fall silent. In their persistence, we find not only the memory of Sumer but the memory of humanity's first attempts to understand itself and the universe. Close your eyes and imagine the priests chanting in the dim light of the temple, their voices rising like incense to the heavens. Imagine the stories carried on the wind across the desert, shared from father to son, from mother to daughter. In the great unfolding of Sumerian civilization, after the myths of gods and the rhythms of daily life, there arose another force that shaped the destiny of the people, the institution of kingship. To the Sumerians, the idea of a king was not merely political but profoundly sacred. They believed that kingship itself descended from heaven, a divine gift bestowed upon humanity by the gods. In their eyes, no city could thrive, no people could endure, without the guiding presence of a king who ruled under divine authority. The earliest rulers were likely tribal leaders, chosen for their strength or wisdom, but in Sumer this role evolved into something greater. Kings were seen as shepherds of their people, protectors who provided safety, justice, and prosperity. Their task was heavy, for they were accountable not only to their subjects but also to the gods. In inscriptions and hymns, kings often called themselves the servant of Enlil or the chosen of Inanna, affirming that their right to rule came from the divine order. One of the most fascinating artifacts of Sumerian history is the Sumerian king list, a document inscribed on clay that records the succession of kings from the beginning of time. According to this list, before the Great Flood, kingship had been established in Eridu, the first city. Some of these early rulers were said to have reigned for thousands of years, impossibly long spans that blur the line between history and myth. After the flood, kingship was said to have been passed to other cities, Kish, Uruk, Ur, and beyond. The list weaves legend and reality together, presenting a vision of history in which human rule is guided and shifted by divine will. Though exaggerated, the king list reveals much about how the Sumerians saw themselves. They believed that power could move from city to city, never resting forever in one place, for the gods granted and withdrew kingship as they saw fit. Thus, no dynasty was eternal, and no city could claim dominance forever. This constant shifting reflects the political reality of Sumer, where rival cities frequently rose and fell in cycles of war and alliance. A Sumerian king was not merely a ruler seated on a throne. He was a warrior, leading armies against enemies who threatened his city's prosperity. He was a builder, commissioning the construction of temples, ziggurats, and canals that sustained the people. He was a judge, ensuring that disputes were settled and that justice prevailed. He was a priestly figure, performing rituals and offering sacrifices on behalf of his city to secure the favor of the gods. In every act, the king embodied both human responsibility and divine mandate. Among the earliest named kings is Gilgamesh, ruler of Uruk, whose deeds became immortalized in epic poetry. While his historical reign remains debated, his legend reflects the ideal of kingship, powerful yet flawed, striving for greatness, and ultimately confronting the limits of human life. Gilgamesh's story, though mythic, captures the spirit of Sumerian kingship, where the line between mortal and divine was always blurred. Other kings, such as Eannatum of Lagash, left more concrete records. Eonatum is remembered for his military campaigns, recorded on the famous Stele of the Vultures, which depicts his army defeating the city of Umma. His inscriptions claim that his victories were granted by Ningirsu, the warrior god of Lagash, showing how rulers always tied their power to divine approval. By presenting themselves as chosen instruments of the gods, kings strengthened their legitimacy and inspired loyalty, or at least obedience. Administration under these rulers grew increasingly sophisticated. Kings employed scribes to record taxes, trade, and decrees. They organized large labor forces for irrigation projects, temple maintenance, and construction. They managed resources, distributing grain, wool, and tools in ways that both sustained the population and ensured loyalty to the throne. In these early structures, we see the foundations of bureaucracy, an invention as lasting as writing or the wheel. The law also became formalized under kingship. While the later Babylonian Code of Hammurabi is famous, the Sumerians already had their own codes of justice. One early example, the Code of Ur, dating from around 2100 BCE, provides a glimpse of these principles. It prescribed fines or punishments for theft, assault, and false accusations. Though not always equitable, social status often influenced justice. The very presence of a written code established an enduring precedent that law should stand above individual whim. Ceremonies and rituals reinforced the king's role. Crowning rituals linked the ruler directly to the gods, often involving symbolic acts such as the placing of crowns, staffs, or sacred garments. Festivals celebrated both divine and royal power, blending religion and politics into a single force. The king was at the center of it all, the axis around which city life revolved. Yet kingship was not without challenges. Rivalries between cities often erupted into war, each claiming divine favor. At times, kings overreached, demanding too much labor or tribute, leading to unrest. Dynasties fell, replaced by others, in a cycle as inevitable as the rising and setting of the sun. But even in failure, the institution of kingship endured, passed down through generations, evolving yet always rooted in its sacred origin. And as we linger on these tales of rulers and their fragile empires, let me whisper softly, if these quiet stories of ancient kings bring you calm, consider keeping them close by following along, so that each new chapter of history can find you again, like the return of kingship from one city to another. Just as the Sumerians believed power should be renewed, so too can these stories return whenever you wish to hear them. The legacy of Sumerian kingship is profound. It set patterns that would shape empires for millennia. The idea that rulers held divine mandate would echo in Egypt, in Israel, in Rome, and far beyond. The practices of record-keeping, taxation, and codified law laid the groundwork for governance across civilizations. Even the symbols of kingship, the crown, the scepter, the throne, have their roots in the earliest rulers of Sumer. As night falls in our imagination, picture a king of Sumer seated in his palace, listening to scribes read reports of harvests and trade, while outside, guards keep watch at the gates, and within temples, priests chant prayers to the gods. The city hums with life, secure under his rule for now, though tomorrow may bring war, or famine, or the shifting favor of the divine. Such was the reality of kingship, powerful yet fragile, glorious yet uncertain, always bound to forces greater than any one man. The Sumerians knew this well. Their king list did not present an unbroken line of triumph, but rather a tapestry of rise and fall, a reminder that all human power is temporary. And yet, by recording these names, by remembering these rulers, they created history itself. In their desire to preserve memory, they ensured that long after their cities crumbled, their kings would still be spoken of, as they are now. In the cities of Sumer, the pulse of life was not only felt in the hum of homes or the prayers at the ziggurats, but also in the bustling activity of trade. From the moment dawn's light touched the mud-brick streets, the marketplace awakened. Merchants laid out baskets of barley, bundles of reeds, clay pots, and woven textiles. The scent of bread and dates mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly dug canals. Life in Sumer depended as much on exchange as it did on labor in the fields or devotion to the gods. Sumerians were among the earliest people to develop a complex economy. Agriculture remained the foundation, but surplus crops allowed for trade, both within cities and with distant lands. Grain, the lifeblood of Sumerian sustenance, became a medium of exchange. Barley was weighed and stored, sometimes even used as a form of currency. Farmers could trade their surplus for tools, pottery, or cloth. This exchange created networks of interdependence, linking villages, towns, and cities into a cohesive economic system. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates were lifelines of commerce. Boats glided along these waterways, carrying sacks of grain, barrels of beer, and clay tablets filled with records of transactions. Harbors and docks bustled with activity as goods were loaded and unloaded. Merchants negotiated prices, scribes kept accounts, and laborers ensured that the flow of goods continued smoothly. The rivers were more than transportation routes, they were arteries of civilization itself. Trade extended far beyond Sumer's borders. Merchants traveled by river and desert, establishing connections with Elam to the east, the Indus Valley to the southeast, and Anatolia to the north. They brought back precious metals like silver and tin, rare stones such as lapis lazuli and carnelian, and exotic goods that enriched both the economy and culture. These exchanges were not merely commercial, they were also conduits for ideas, art, and technology, spreading the innovations of Sumer across the ancient world. The city streets themselves reflected this commercial vitality. Market stalls lined with goods created a rhythm of life that repeated daily. Potters displayed intricate vessels, weavers hung patterned textiles, and jewelers showcased necklaces and beads that sparkled in the sun. Buyers, sellers, and travelers moved among them, exchanging goods, stories, and sometimes rumors. The marketplace was a place of connection, a forum where the threads of society were woven together through trade. Merchants were supported by systems of writing and record-keeping. Clay tablets recorded sales, debts, and contracts. Scribes carefully documented each transaction, ensuring that trade remained organized and that obligations could be enforced. This attention to detail allowed Sumer to sustain a sophisticated economy, capable of supporting large cities with tens of thousands of inhabitants. The written word became as essential as the goods themselves, a guarantee of trust in the marketplace. Craftsmen played a critical role in this economic system. Artisans specialized in pottery, metalwork, weaving, and woodworking. Their creations were sold locally and exported across regions. Cylinder seals, small engraved objects used to sign documents or mark ownership, were a combination of artistry and utility, demonstrating both economic and cultural sophistication. In this way, craftwork became both a livelihood and a lasting contribution to civilization. Trade was also deeply entwined with religion. Temples often acted as economic centers, receiving goods as offerings, storing surplus, and redistributing wealth. Priests and administrators oversaw these operations, ensuring that trade served both sacred and practical needs. Festivals and religious ceremonies often coincided with market activity, blending commerce and devotion into a single rhythm of life. The divine and the economic were inseparable, each giving legitimacy and meaning to the other. Caravan trade carried Sumerian goods across deserts and mountains. Camel and donkey caravans traveled long distances, braving heat, storms, and bandits. Along these routes, goods were exchanged, and Sumerian influence spread. These journeys were slow and perilous, yet they connected distant lands in a network that made civilization possible. The movement of goods mirrored the movement of ideas, allowing the culture of Sumer to travel far beyond the confines of its cities. And as we drift quietly through these tales of commerce and connection, allow a soft reminder to settle in your mind. If these calm stories of ancient trade bring you comfort and curiosity, following along will ensure that each new chapter finds you, like a merchant's caravan returning from a distant land, carrying treasures to enrich your imagination and your rest. The economy of Sumer was not only material but social. Trade created hierarchies, alliances, and competition. Wealth allowed some families to build larger homes, sponsor temples, or fund expeditions. Cities competed for dominance in trade, seeking to control routes, secure resources, and attract skilled artisans. These economic pressures shaped politics, warfare, and urban planning. Roads, bridges, and canals were engineered to facilitate the flow of goods, demonstrating how commerce inspired technological innovation. Even simple daily life reflected economic realities. Families purchased food from local markets, bartered for clothing or tools, and occasionally invested in livestock. The exchange of goods reinforced social bonds, linking individuals to families, communities, and cities. Every transaction carried weight, not only in material value but in trust, honor, and reputation. Sumerian civilization thrived because these exchanges were both practical and principled, guided by law, custom, and divine sanction. In the quiet of the night, imagine the city of Ur or Lagash settling after a long day of trade. The streets empty, lanterns dim, the marketplace silent. Warehouses filled with grain, textiles, and precious goods, carefully recorded on clay tablets, waiting for the next day's activity. The rivers reflect the moonlight, carrying the echoes of distant trade, connecting lands, peoples, and cultures. Sumerian civilization thrived on this rhythm, sustained by commerce, creativity, and the human drive to connect. Through trade, Sumerian society was linked not only within its cities but across regions, shaping a world that was already interconnected long before globalization was a concept. The economy was the lifeblood of their civilization, a testament to human ingenuity, cooperation, and perseverance. And in this network of exchange, the Sumerians left a legacy that would resonate for thousands of years, reminding us that commerce is not merely about goods, it is about relationships, culture, and the shared journey of humanity. As we drift deeper into the ancient world of Sumer, we encounter not only the rhythm of life and the stories of kings and gods, but also the astonishing ingenuity of human minds at work. The Sumerians were not content merely to survive, they sought to understand, to measure, and to shape the world around them. Their innovations, both practical and intellectual, laid the foundation for countless civilizations to come, echoing through the millennia in ways that still touch our lives today. Central to Sumerian advancement was the invention of writing. Cuneiform, etched into clay tablets with a reed stylus, began as a method of accounting, a way to record grain, livestock, and transactions. Yet, over time, this simple system of marks became a medium for language, literature, and history. Schools emerged to teach the art of writing, where students spent long hours copying signs onto tablets, learning to balance precision with clarity. Through writing, knowledge could be preserved, laws codified, and stories passed down through generations, a tool that would allow the Sumerians to communicate across time. Mathematics, too, flourished in Sumer. They developed a system based on the number 60, which may seem strange to us now, but its influence persists in how we measure time and angles. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and the division of circles into 360 degrees all trace back to Sumerian ingenuity. Arithmetic was applied not only in trade and taxation but also in engineering, architecture, and astronomy. The ability to calculate, measure, and predict made their society more organized and their cities more resilient. The Sumerians turned their attention to the sky as well. Observing the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, they developed the earliest forms of astronomy. They charted lunar cycles to create calendars, crucial for agricultural planning, religious festivals, and civic events. These observations were meticulous, recorded on clay tablets, showing an early understanding of patterns, repetition, and the passage of time. To the Sumerians, the heavens were both a source of wonder and a guide for earthly life. Engineering achievements transformed the landscape itself. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates brought both fertility and danger, and the Sumerians learned to manage these waters with remarkable skill. Canals, levees, and reservoirs channeled water to fields, preventing both drought and flood. Bridges allowed easier movement across channels, connecting neighborhoods and towns. These infrastructures required not only labor but planning, measurement, and coordination, demonstrating the Sumerians' ability to impose order upon the natural world. Ziggurats, the monumental temple structures, stood as both religious and technological marvels. Rising in terraces toward the sky, they required precise design, brickmaking, and engineering knowledge. Each layer of the ziggurat had to be stable and strong, often involving thousands of workers over many years. These structures were more than ceremonial, they were symbols of human mastery over materials and space, reflecting the integration of technology, labor, and belief. The invention of the wheel, one of the most transformative achievements, revolutionized transport and trade. Wheels allowed carts to carry heavier loads over longer distances, making both commerce and construction more efficient. Roads and pathways were developed to accommodate these vehicles, further connecting cities and enabling the movement of goods, ideas, and people. In this way, the Sumerians accelerated their own civilization and paved the way for others to follow. Artisans and craftspeople applied these technologies in daily life as well. Kilns fired pottery, looms wove complex textiles, and metals were cast into tools, ornaments, and weapons. Measurement systems ensured uniformity and fairness in trade, while architectural knowledge allowed homes, granaries, and walls to endure. In Sumer, the practical and the inventive were inseparable. Creativity was a necessary response to survival and ambition. Medicine and hygiene also benefited from observation and experimentation. Physicians documented treatments, herbs, and procedures on clay tablets. They sought to understand the causes of illness, blending practical remedies with religious ritual. While we may find some of their methods strange today, their approach laid the groundwork for systematic inquiry and the idea that knowledge could improve human life. And as we explore these extraordinary achievements, let me offer a gentle reminder in passing: if these stories of human ingenuity and discovery bring you calm and curiosity, following along will allow each new chapter of history to find you again, quietly, as if you were reading a tablet in the soft light of an ancient Sumerian schoolroom. Even in leisure, innovation persisted. Music instruments, games, and artistic creations were enhanced by technology. Clay tablets recorded not only accounts and laws but poetry, myths, and lessons. Knowledge was not limited to survival; it enriched culture, connected people, and gave meaning to existence. The Sumerians understood that progress was not only about material comfort but also about nurturing the mind and spirit. Through canals and ziggurats, through wheels and calculations, the Sumerians transformed their environment and their society. They turned rivers into highways, mud into enduring structures, and observation into knowledge. Their cities flourished because they applied reason and creativity, blending practical skill with imagination. And while empires rise and fall, the tools and ideas they invented endured, carried forward by later civilizations and, ultimately, by us. As night deepens, imagine a Sumerian scribe carefully pressing symbols into a clay tablet, the light of an oil lamp flickering across the text. Outside, the canal waters glisten under the stars, reflecting the same constellations the Sumerians once charted. Builders rest from a day of work, the ziggurat looming in silhouette against the sky. Farmers dream beside their granaries, anticipating tomorrow's harvest. Knowledge, labor, and imagination continue in quiet harmony, a testament to the enduring legacy of human creativity. And in the calm of this imagined night, you too can rest, letting the brilliance of Sumerian thought and invention guide you into gentle slumber. As the cities of Sumer rose along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, prosperity brought both opportunities and threats. Fertile lands, canals, and trade routes became prizes that each city-state sought to control. The story of Sumer is not only one of brilliant inventions, art, and devotion but also of conflict, as rulers and peoples vied for resources, prestige, and survival. Though the cities were close neighbors, peace was never guaranteed, and the specter of war lingered in the minds of kings and citizens alike. Each city-state maintained its own army, often led by the king himself, who was both a political and military figure. Soldiers were recruited from the citizenry, trained to wield bows, spears, axes, and shields. Chariots, drawn by donkeys or horses in later periods, provided mobility and shock power on the battlefield. Fortifications surrounded cities, thick mud brick walls, watchtowers, and gates that could be defended against attackers. Even the layout of streets and canals was influenced by strategic considerations, ensuring that citizens could move and defend themselves efficiently. Conflicts arose for many reasons. Control over fertile land and water was paramount, as a city that could irrigate its fields prospered, while those without water risked famine. Trade routes and access to resources like timber, metals, and stone sparked disputes. Rivalries could also be driven by ambition, honor, or religious claims, with kings seeking to extend their influence or prove their favor with the gods through military success. Each campaign was a test of leadership, strategy, and the loyalty of soldiers. Notable rulers left vivid records of their military endeavors. Eonatum of Lagash, for example, famously recorded his victories over Umma on the Steel of the Vultures, illustrating soldiers in formation, captured enemies, and divine oversight from the warrior god Ningirsu. These depictions were more than propaganda, They communicated the connection between military success, divine favor, and political legitimacy. In Sumer, victory in battle was not only a measure of human skill but also a reflection of the gods' approval. The organization of armies was sophisticated for its time. Infantry formed the bulk of forces, wielding spears and shields, while archers provided ranged support. Chariots, though limited, were employed to break enemy lines or transport commanders. Coordination, discipline, and morale were critical. A city's survival could depend on its ability to mobilize quickly and defend its walls effectively. Training, strategy, and knowledge of terrain were as important as sheer numbers. Sieges were a common aspect of warfare. Attackers sought to breach walls, block water supplies, or starve cities into submission. Defenders relied on fortifications, defensive tactics, and sometimes divine intervention, performing rituals and offerings to seek protection from the gods. Temples and ziggurats were often central in these conflicts, both as symbols to be defended and as sources of logistical support. Religious and military spheres were tightly intertwined, with priests blessing soldiers and kings attributing victories to divine will. While warfare brought destruction, it also spurred technological and organizational advances. Weapons improved, tactics evolved, and the logistics of moving armies over difficult terrain became more refined. Cities developed granaries to withstand sieges, canals were reinforced to protect water supplies, and walls grew stronger and more complex. In this way, the pressures of conflict drove innovation and shaped the urban landscape, leaving marks that archaeologists can still observe today. The human cost of war was significant. Soldiers and civilians alike endured hardships, from injury to displacement. Families were affected, economies disrupted, and populations sometimes decimated. Yet Sumerian society persisted, resilient and adaptive. Peaceful periods were often brief but allowed recovery, trade, and cultural flourishing. The cycle of war and peace became part of the rhythm of life, echoing through the generations. And as we move quietly through these tales of battle and strategy, allow this gentle reminder: if the calm exploration of history brings you rest, following along will ensure that each new story finds you, like a messenger returning across a battlefield, carrying knowledge and reflection to your mind. Even amidst conflict, there is rhythm, there is story, there is understanding to be found. Victory and conquest influenced the political landscape. Cities that triumphed often absorbed or allied with their neighbors, creating shifting coalitions and emergent power structures. Defeated cities rebuilt under new rulers, sometimes preserving aspects of their own culture within a larger polity. Kings used military success to consolidate authority, reward allies, and expand trade networks. Thus, warfare was not merely destruction, it was a force that shaped governance, society, and economic relations. Despite the hardships, Sumerian warfare also contained elements of ritual and spectacle. Processions, displays of captured spoils, and ceremonial dedications reinforced the sacred nature of military endeavors. The gods were invoked before, during, and after campaigns, emphasizing that even in acts of violence, divine order was paramount. War was both practical and symbolic, a way for humans to negotiate power while acknowledging forces greater than themselves. Through sieges and skirmishes, through the rise and fall of city-states, the Sumerians honed skills that would echo in Mesopotamian history for centuries. Lessons of strategy, logistics, and governance learned on these battlegrounds informed later empires, from Akkad to Babylon. Each conflict left traces, both physical in walls and artifacts, and intangible in memory and record. History remembers these struggles not only for their drama but for how they shaped civilization. As night descends in our imagined Sumerian city, the sounds of conflict fade into memory. Soldiers rest within fortified walls, archers clean their bows, and watchmen maintain vigilance over the silent streets. Temples are quiet, yet the memory of divine protection lingers. Trade resumes at dawn, life continues, and the cycle of preparation, defense, and survival marches on. In the quiet of night, the legacies of war and the courage of those who lived through it whisper their lessons to us, echoing across millennia and offering insight into the resilience and complexity of the first civilization. In the quiet streets and bustling temples of Sumer, culture thrived alongside religion, governance, and commerce. The Sumerians expressed themselves through music, art, and ritual, crafting a civilization rich with beauty, creativity, and meaning. Each melody, sculpture, or painted scene was not mere decoration, it was a reflection of their understanding of the world, their reverence for the divine, and their deep connection to community life. Music was central to Sumerian culture. Harps, lyres, and drums accompanied religious ceremonies, festivals, and daily activities. Musicians played in temples to honor gods, filling ziggurats with resonant, harmonious sound that seemed to echo the cosmos itself. Songs told stories of gods and kings, of love, war, and the natural world, preserving myths and history in melody as well as words. Music brought people together, easing labor, celebrating victories, and honoring the cycles of life. Sculpture and relief work adorned temples, palaces, and public spaces. Intricate carvings depicted gods, kings, warriors, and animals in detailed poses, capturing both realism and symbolism. Cylinder seals, engraved with complex scenes, served practical purposes in trade but also reflected artistic sophistication. Each line, curve, and symbol conveyed narrative, status, and divine connection. Through these artistic expressions, the Sumerians communicated across time, leaving messages of faith, power, and identity that endure thousands of years later. Painting, though less preserved, decorated pottery, walls, and ceremonial objects. Vivid colors were used to illustrate myths, record events, and embellish everyday items. Scenes of hunting, agriculture, and city life depicted both the mundanity and grandeur of human existence, merging observation with imagination. Art was inseparable from storytelling, each piece carried meaning, often intertwined with moral, religious, or historical lessons. Clothing and personal adornment reflected social status, occupation, and ritual significance. Linen garments were common, with variations in style and decoration indicating rank or role. Jewelry, including necklaces, bracelets, and earrings, incorporated gold, silver, and precious stones. Hair and headdresses were often styled according to custom or ceremonial needs. Attire was not simply functional, it was a form of communication, signaling identity, devotion, and connection to society and the divine. Festivals and rituals punctuated the Sumerian year. Seasonal celebrations marked planting, harvest, and the lunar calendar. Temples became centers of communal activity, hosting music, dance, and ceremonial processions. Priests and priestesses guided these events, blending spirituality with civic life. Participation reinforced social bonds, affirmed religious beliefs, and allowed citizens to partake in shared cultural heritage. These festivals were vibrant expressions of collective identity and devotion. Literature and storytelling were equally vital. Epic poems, hymns, and prayers captured history, myth, and moral teachings. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance, preserved themes of friendship, mortality, and the quest for meaning, blending narrative artistry with philosophical reflection. Stories were performed orally, written on clay tablets, and integrated into ceremonies, ensuring that culture remained alive, transmitted from one generation to the next. Daily life itself was steeped in cultural practice. Families observed customs, taught children songs and crafts, and passed down rituals. Markets, workshops, and communal spaces were venues for cultural exchange. Education involved both practical skills and moral lessons, often transmitted through storytelling, apprenticeship, and ritual participation. Culture was lived, experienced, and shared, shaping Sumerian identity in tangible ways. Architecture and urban planning reflected aesthetic as well as functional priorities. Temples, ziggurats, palaces, and public squares were designed with proportion, symmetry, and symbolic meaning. Walls and gates were decorated with reliefs and inscriptions, celebrating victories, honoring gods, and asserting civic pride. Even ordinary houses exhibited craftsmanship, with decorated doors, pottery, and furniture reflecting cultural values. The built environment was an expression of belief, creativity, and social hierarchy. And as we move softly through this rich tapestry of culture, let me quietly remind you, if these gentle stories of Sumerian art and life bring you peace or curiosity, following along will allow each new chapter to reach you, like a whispered melody carried across the centuries, connecting imagination and rest. In the calm of this reflection, you can hear the echoes of music, see the shapes of sculptures, and sense the rhythms of festivals long past. Sumerian art and culture were not static. They evolved with each generation, absorbing influences from neighboring regions while maintaining a distinct identity. Innovations in technique, symbolism, and ritual practice demonstrated adaptability and creativity. Through artistic and cultural achievements, the Sumerians documented their understanding of the world, their reverence for the gods, and their aspirations for society. They left a legacy that would inspire future civilizations across Mesopotamia and beyond. As night falls upon the imagined city, music drifts from a distant temple, lamps illuminate clay sculptures, and the soft patterns of textile hangings catch the flickering light. Families recount myths of gods and kings, children learn songs and crafts, and artisans rest after a day of creation. The vibrancy of culture continues quietly, sustaining society and spirit alike. Through art, music, and ritual, the Sumerians achieved a form of immortality, leaving traces that still speak to us, guiding us gently through history as we drift into peaceful slumber. As we approach the final chapter of our journey through Sumer, the story turns to one of the most enduring and profound legacies of this ancient civilization, the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the city of Uruk, amidst towering walls and bustling streets, there lived a king who was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. Gilgamesh, ruler and hero, embodied the tensions of humanity, strength and weakness, pride and compassion, mortality and the longing for immortality. His story, recorded on clay tablets in cuneiform, resonates through time as a reflection of the human experience. Gilgamesh's early reign was marked by arrogance and power. He was a mighty warrior, building walls, leading armies, and commanding respect through sheer force. Yet his pride troubled the citizens of Uruk, prompting the gods to create Enkidu, a wild man of the steppe, to challenge him. Their confrontation led not to conflict alone, but to friendship, a bond that transformed both men. In Enkidu, Gilgamesh discovered companionship, empathy, and the depth of human connection. Through their adventures, they faced formidable foes, monstrous beings, and divine tests, all of which shaped their understanding of courage and responsibility. The story of Gilgamesh is also a meditation on mortality. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is confronted with the inevitability of human death. His grief propels him on a journey to find eternal life, seeking wisdom from distant lands and immortal beings. He crosses deserts, climbs mountains, and navigates treacherous waters, encountering truths about the natural order and the limits of power. Though he ultimately fails to secure immortality, Gilgamesh returns to Uruk transformed, accepting the impermanence of life while embracing the enduring legacy one leaves behind. This epic is remarkable not only for its narrative power but also for its philosophical depth. It explores themes that remain relevant across millennia: friendship, courage, the search for meaning, and the inevitability of death. Through Gilgamesh's journey, the Sumerians reflected on what it means to live a good life, how to face loss, and how to achieve a form of immortality through deeds, legacy, and culture. The story blends human experience with divine presence, showing the interplay between mortal effort and cosmic order. The tablets of Gilgamesh also illuminate the practical aspects of Sumerian life. They describe cities, rivers, mountains, and forests, painting vivid landscapes of Mesopotamia. Daily activities, social structures, and cultural practices are embedded within the narrative, providing a window into how Sumerians understood their world. Through myth and adventure, we gain insight into their environment, values, and societal organization, all preserved through the meticulous work of scribes. And as we listen to the quiet wisdom of these ancient words, a gentle invitation emerges. If the calm stories of Gilgamesh and Sumerian civilization soothe your mind and spark your curiosity, following along will allow more chapters of history to reach you, guiding your imagination like a lantern through the soft shadows of time. The past, though distant, can always find a way to illuminate the present. Beyond the tale of Gilgamesh, the legacy of Sumer extends through countless avenues. Their innovations in writing, mathematics, astronomy, law, and governance shaped the civilizations that followed. Art, literature, and religious thought influenced Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, and even regions far beyond Mesopotamia. Trade networks they established connected lands and peoples, fostering cultural exchange that persisted long after their city-states declined. In every field, Sumerian ingenuity left traces that resonate to this day. Sumerians also bequeathed a vision of urban life. Cities with structured layouts, temples, palaces, and markets became models for later urban planning. Social hierarchies, bureaucracies, and legal systems provided frameworks that informed subsequent empires. Even in decline, Sumerian culture continued to shape art, literature, governance, and religion, proving that ideas and knowledge can endure far longer than walls of mud brick. The Epic of Gilgamesh, in particular, reminds us that the human spirit seeks understanding, connection, and meaning. It captures the interplay between the ephemeral and the eternal, the individual and the society, the mortal and the divine. In its verses, we hear the heartbeat of Sumer itself, a civilization that dared to ask the profound questions, to build, to create, and to reflect upon the nature of life and legacy. Imagine, as night settles, the streets of Uruk quieting under the soft glow of lamps. The great walls stand silent, the ziggurats loom against the starlit sky, and the city rests in the embrace of the river's gentle current. Somewhere, a scribe places the final clay tablet in a library, preserving tales of kings, gods, trade, war, art, and human endeavor. The songs of musicians echo softly, the tools of artisans are set aside, and the stories of heroes drift like whispers through time. It is here, in this calm, that the full spectrum of Sumerian civilization can be felt, a civilization of thought, innovation, and enduring humanity. And as you drift in the quiet of this imagined world, remember that the legacy of Sumer continues, not only in history books or museums, but in every measure of human curiosity, creativity, and the endless search for meaning. Through their stories, inventions, and enduring wisdom, the Sumerians speak to us across millennia, offering comfort, insight, and the gentle reminder that even the earliest civilizations were built by humans like us, dreaming, striving, and reaching for the stars.